two horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. And so here we find it looks as though this ram with these two great horns, which is a very great, powerful beast, it looks as though he could hold his own in a fight. And yet this other one moves in with such a finality and such a determinedness and such a just a devastating tenacity that the other one just is destroyed by him. Have you ever seen anything like that? Sometimes you'll see it in a competition between athletes. Sometimes there'll be a big boxing match that's being planned on, and somebody, and they think, boy, these two are big powerhouses, and it's going to be a slugfest. And yet one of them comes to the fight, and though both of them are fit, though both of them are capable, both of them are trained, one just comes in and just destroys the other opponent. And you see it in competition sometimes. I haven't watched football in several years, but a few years ago, I remember, I think it was in 2006, when the Colts won the Super Bowl against the Patriots, wasn't it? It was Peyton Manning. Yeah, no, we're not talking about playoffs. We're talking about the Super Bowl. It was the Colts against the Patriots. And here is Peyton Manning, who's an up-and-coming quarterback at that time, and Tom Brady, who has this team that just seems devastating. And everybody favored the Patriots in an even matchup. And yet, wasn't the score something like 40 to
24?
Was that what it was?
Yeah.
Are you being serious? I think it was something like that. In other words, it was, here come the Colts, and they came to play ball.
No, it was 41-31.
Whatever it was. Anyway, so the Colts come to play ball, and I mean, it was devastating. It wasn't, and here's the thing, I like the Colts better, but I was saying that the Patriots would win just because I was being honest about the odds. And yet the Colts come, and I mean, just pounded them. Well, this is sort of like an Alexander the Great. This is like this Greek kingdom of Alexander the Great. And the greatness really didn't have so much to do with his backing. It just had to do with this tenacity and this military style. It had a shock and awe. And when you have somebody that comes and they're better than they're supposed to be, and they're stronger than they're supposed to be, and you realize, wow, I way underestimated my opponent, what usually happens is you just turn tail and run. And that's the way this power of Alexander the Great was. He conquered the world so fast that it just had this fear and intimidation factor in him, which is a good way, if you're going to conquer something, to get it done. It makes things a lot easier on yourself. It's easier to beat up somebody running than somebody staying and fighting. Well, anyway, now verse 8. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of the heaven, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. Now, look at this. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. Now, we've just moved from a ruler which is able to devastate physically to a ruler who seems to be able to do destruction on a whole different plane, on a spiritual level. And this ruler is one that would seem to defy the host of heaven and even win a victory against them. Now I have to ask you the question, when Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus Epiphanes, or however you'd like to pronounce his name, went into the temple and took the altar and sacrificed a swine on it, do you think that was offensive to more than just the Jews? Who was the affront actually against? It was actually against God. I understand the devastating effect that would have on people that believe God is all-powerful and can protect them. In other words, if somebody thinks their God is powerful, walk up and kick it, or smash it, or whatever. The problem with the temple was that the Jewish people were worshiping the temple and not God. But it was, in a sense, Alexander taking a poke at God in heaven. Or not, did I say Alexander? I said Antiochus. epiphanies. And now if you would think of things from the perspective of Israel, who have had atrocities committed against them. Do you remember when Jonah was unwilling to go to Nineveh and cry against it? What was the reason for that? Because of the atrocities committed by the Syrian people. The Syrian people had done such terrible things to God's people that Jonah literally hated them and wanted them to die. But here is an individual who is doing more than just devastating the people. He's attacking their very core, their very root, their very existence. Where did Israel come from? God. What did they owe their existence to? How did they get in the promised land to begin with? God gave it to them. How did they come to be a people? I mean, here the Pharaoh orders that all the children be killed, and yet the midwives fear God and aren't willing to kill them. And they multiply in spite of this death sentence on their firstborn male or on their male children. And then God just takes them out of Egypt, the greatest nation in the world at that time, and marches them in the wilderness and preserves them, and then gives to them the promised land. And they knew historically that God was powerful. They could also know that God's prophet had promised, because of their breaking His covenant, breaking their covenant to Him, that God had promised captivity and terrible devastation, so they can understand things being done to them. But when an affront is made against the place that represents the dwelling place and the place of sacrifice for God in heaven, then there's an affront like nothing else. And I don't know about you, my friend, but this would seem rather devastating. I think if I were Israel today, and I don't know, because Israel does not honor God, there's very little love in the nation of Israel. A couple of years ago, my wife and I it was right during the war against Iraq, and we were speaking with a man who was Jewish, and he was extremely liberal in his politics. And and I've had it explained to me reasons why most Jewish people in America are liberal. I don't understand being liberal in your politics, because the liberals in America hate the Jews. And yet that's the direction they seem to lean, and they're against Israel and against those things. Well, he said, we have no business going into Iraq and so on and so forth, There's no weapons of mass destruction and all these things. I said, for me, weapons of mass destruction or no weapons of mass destruction. We've seen videotape from Saddam Hussein who claimed that he had weapons of mass destruction that proved that he did. But all that being aside, the fact of the matter is that Saddam Hussein was a dictator who committed atrocities against mankind, and anybody who's a benevolent person or a kind person at all, has any kind of respect for human life, will want to see Saddam Hussein taken out of power and the Iraqi people liberated. By the way, I have friends that have been to Iraq and as in the military and have gone and done work over there, and they say that the Iraqi people see America as a liberating nation. And it's a very small minority that our press reports on that would hate America. They love America in Iraq. They think America's wonderful for giving them freedom from Saddam Hussein. Well, so I made the point to him. I said, well, you know what? I just think that Saddam committed crimes against humanity. And that anybody who values human life, understanding that we were made in the image of God, has a moral obligation to do something to protect the innocent. And of course, you could argue, well, Pastor, there's terrible things done against the innocent every day, and we ought to do something about it. I agree with you. I don't disagree with that, but I do think that it was fine to do because of that. And this individual who's Jewish said to me, he said, I just let them kill themselves. Just let them kill each other. Who cares? And basically his mindset was, you know what? Let them kill each other, and the world will be rid of them. In other words, he had an attitude of genocide toward them. Like if they wipe themselves out, that'll be better for the world anyway. And you know that kind of an attitude translates to all kind of people. And what he said was, hey, I don't want to have to pay for it. I don't want to have to pay to spare the lives of others. And bottom line is most people love their own selves so much that they don't care about atrocities that are done to other people because it might cost them money.